He did not run. He did not disappear. He sent an email to his colleagues, saying he had failed, saying he was sorry. $2.3 billion lost. Then he sat and waited for the police. This is Kweku Adoboli. On the morning of September 14, 2011, Kweku Adoboli walked into the offices of UBS in London and he told his supervisors that he had lost $2.3 billion of the bank's money through unauthorized trades, and he did not run and he did not disappear, and he sent an email to his colleagues saying that he had failed and that he was sorry, and then he sat and waited for the police to arrive, and when they did he was arrested and charged with fraud and false accounting, and the story of how a 31-year-old trader from Ghana had managed to accumulate the largest unauthorized trading loss in British banking history, while working at one of the world's most closely regulated financial institutions, is a story not just about one man's recklessness but about the culture of a trading floor and the systems that were supposed to catch exactly what happened but did not. Kweku Adoboli was born in Tema, Ghana in 1980, and he came to Britain as a teenager when his father, a senior United Nations official, was posted to England, and he was educated at the University of Nottingham where he studied e-commerce and digital business, and after graduating he joined UBS as a graduate trainee in 2002, initially in the back office, the part of the bank that processes and settles trades rather than executing them, and this back office experience would later prove significant, because it gave Adoboli detailed knowledge of exactly how trades were recorded and reconciled and what gaps existed in the oversight systems. Adoboli moved from the back office to the trading floor and eventually became a trader on UBS's Delta One desk, a type of trading desk that deals in exchange-traded funds and equity index derivatives, instruments that are supposed to track the performance of stock market indices and that are used by clients who want straightforward market exposure. And Adoboli became one of the most productive traders on the desk, known for his energy, his relationships with clients, and his ability to generate revenue for the bank. But from around 2008, Adoboli began using his detailed knowledge of UBS's settlement and reconciliation systems to create fictitious trades that existed on paper but did not represent real market positions, and he used these fictitious trades to hide the true risk profile of his actual trading book, creating the appearance that his positions were hedged and within risk limits when in reality he had accumulated enormous unhedged exposure to the direction of the market, and the motivation for this was a familiar one. He had made losses that he wanted to hide while he traded his way back to zero, and as so often happens, the losses grew rather than shrank and the positions became larger and the fictitious trades multiplied to cover the growing gap between what the books showed and what was actually happening. By September 2011, the fictitious positions Adoboli had built up had concealed losses of approximately $2.3 billion, and the UBS risk systems had been raising flags about discrepancies in his trading book for some time, and colleagues and back-office staff had been asking questions that Adoboli had deflected or answered with further fictions, and when the market moved decisively against his positions. In the volatility of September 2011, following the European debt crisis and global market turbulence of that period, the losses became too large to hide any further. What happened next distinguished Adoboli's case from some other rogue trading stories. Rather than fleeing, he disclosed what he had done. His confession email sent to colleagues in the early hours of September 14 contained a detailed account of what had happened and expressed what appeared to be genuine remorse, and the police were called not by Adoboli himself but by UBS, and he was arrested at the bank's offices, and the speed and manner of the confession meant that the investigation moved quickly and the facts were established relatively rapidly. UBS's own failures were a significant part of the story, and the bank was fined £29.7 million by the Financial Services Authority, which found that UBS had failed to maintain adequate systems and controls that would have detected Adoboli's fictitious trades earlier. The FSA found that multiple risk management and control systems had failed to catch what Adoboli was doing, despite the fact that those systems had been specifically designed to identify the kinds of discrepancies he was creating, and the FSA report made clear that while Adoboli bore individual responsibility for his actions, the bank's failure to operate adequate controls created the environment in which those actions were possible. Adoboli was charged with 2 counts of fraud and 4 counts of false accounting, and his trial at Southwark Crown Court began in September 2012 and was one of the most closely followed financial crime trials in British history. And Adoboli's defense, unusually for such a case, was not to deny the trades but to argue that his managers had known and implicitly approved of what he was doing, that the culture of the desk was one in which risk limits were treated as guidelines rather than absolute constraints, and that his conduct had been within a tacitly accepted range of behavior for the desk. And this defense was ultimately unsuccessful, but it raised uncomfortable questions about whether it was entirely without foundation. In November 2012, Adoboli was convicted on 2 counts of fraud. The jury failed to reach verdicts on the false accounting counts. and he was sentenced to 7 years in prison, and he served 3.5 years before being released in 2015 and was subsequently deported to Ghana. A decision that was widely criticized because Adoboli had lived in Britain since his teenage years and regarded it as home and had no meaningful connection to Ghana. So what is the real lesson of Kweku Adoboli and UBS? And the lesson is about the relationship between individual responsibility and institutional accountability, and Adoboli was individually responsible for the trades he made and for the fictions he created to conceal them, and the jury found that he had committed fraud and that judgment was legally correct, and at the same time the UBS systems that were supposed to catch exactly what Adoboli was doing, the risk limits and the reconciliation processes and the oversight structures, had failed, and the bank paid a significant fine in recognition of those failures. And the question that the case raises is whether the sentence Adoboli received, 7 years in prison followed by deportation to a country he had left as a child, was proportionate given that the institutional failures that made his fraud possible were acknowledged and penalized only in financial terms. And this question of proportionality between individual and institutional accountability in financial crime remains one of the most contested in modern financial regulation. That is the capital case. Subscribe to the capital case because the next case is already waiting.